All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks, but here we are, alive, well, dreading the reality we live in. But that all goes aside for a moment. We're going to talk about fake dystopia for a little bit. As always, my name is Emmerron. I am a guy who works here and very occasionally makes content over on my channel. And joining me, as always, is my co-host.
Hello everybody, I'm Diamond Dust. I stream on Twitch, I make stuff on YouTube, and work as a professional GM as well.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Emmerron!
This is the thing we both do is very much professional GM. I have not run a game in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But we're getting back. It's been a busy time.
What do we talk about this week? Because if you, clicked on the link below on my half of the episode, you would know that I'm bringing something up.
Yeah, and if you are catching this on YouTube, Spotify, you'll have just come from that half the episode. You'll have full context of what we're talking about. But if you are watching this on my YouTube channel, Diamond's is part 1 this week. Hers is linked down in the description, and you can join through that to see what we talked about in part 1. It was a lot of talking about RenCon and kind of what's been going on the last couple weeks and kind of the differences of all that. For my half this week, because it is my birthday and I decided I wanted to get a little more specific than a version of this topic that Diamond had kind of brought up as something we could talk about this week. There was a conversation that I briefly kind of poked my head in on over on the Arctal Saurian Discord server, where someone was asking about how other GMs would go about building out a corporation within their setting and prepping that to run a game for their table or whatever. And they were very much asking about how do I think about this? How do I do this? And it brought me back around to something that as it actually came out of one of the interviews we've done with Jay, because I feel like, especially because Cyberpunk is one of these games that, unlike Daggerheart and D&D and Pathfinder, which have a little bit of they've got a little bit of a setting, right? Daggerheart does it a little differently, where they give us a bunch of little frames, but they're very much like, define this for yourself, define this for your group, define this as your table will, and build that into whatever it will become. By contrast, Cyberpunk and other games like it, Vampire would be another that I could easily think about here and call upon. They have this very rich world building, lore, stories that have already happened, characters that played parts in those stories, and we get so there are definitely a class of players, and I'm kind of one of them, that I know at times will lean like, okay, but what is the canon of that? I want to know what the story was, like what was the full beginning, middle, end of those events. I want to understand them. And while we, for certain things within context of Cyberpunk, have answers, right? We know, at the very least, the really broad strokes of here's how Arasaka Tower fell. Here is how, the original part of the data crash kind of started to happen. Here was the broad context around what that looked like, who the big players were involved in the beginnings of that. Here's how netrunning came to be. Here's how Braindance came to be. Later on, here's how the Neuroport came to be. We know the major players, we know the events, we know some of the context in which that kind of arose. But critically, importantly, we do not know all of the details. We don't know the nitty-gritty. We don't know. Who knows when the first power weapon was developed, or the first tech weapon, or the first smart weapon in the way that 2077 presents them. We don't know how these things came about. They are what I believe Jay called great mysteries. And some things get a little more nuanced than that. In the context of Cyberpunk Red in particular, David Ling Poe has quite a few entities under his thumb. And there are some things that are like they are kind of like understood, like he has something there, but it's not really known what. And everyone who is canon obsessed is leaning in like, what's the context? What is the answer? And
what does this man know?
what is the story there? And the fact is that Jay has said there isn't one. There's no one right answer. That is a great mystery. What I like to call a blank. In other words, you leave that open so that you can fill that later. And when you're building a world, this makes way more sense when you're trying to build something that players and tables can interact with, because like you need spaces for them to develop their own ideas, right? And build their own narratives and do all of that stuff. The thing is, a lot of, especially novice GMs, and this is something I've talked about on my own channel quite a bit, they will want to prepare for every little thing, right? Like, I know I made this mistake when I was new myself. Diamond, I'm sure you've made this mistake once or twice back when you had less experience doing it, but like, it's very easy to try to like think really hard about like, what will my players do? Or how will they experience something? And like, you almost kind of drive yourself into getting lost in the weeds a little bit and over preparing yourself for a particular line of thinking and decision making that then inevitably, as I'm sure you've experienced as well as I have, your players don't go there. They don't experience it the way you thought they would. They don't take the same path to it that you thought they would. And so all of a sudden you're like, oh, fuck. And you're coming up with all this stuff on the fly. First of all, am I accurately representing an experience that you've had at the table?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is where I'd like to propose a novel. Some might say crazy idea that leaving blanks in your preparation is so beneficial because you can be more flexible and allow your table to kind of wind around the concepts your players are bringing to the fore, rather than worrying in advance about overdeveloping a particular line of thinking or a particular way that things will unfold, or particular series of events, like, and especially in the context of like, in the context of a single adventure, this is less the way that I usually run things. But in the context of a whole campaign, there are plenty of blanks. There's so many places where I say, I know I want to end up here, like as a campaign end or whatever. But like, this is where I want the kind of mid-season finale to coalesce around. This is where I want to begin. Like, I know my beginning, I know my middle, I know my end. Everything else in between almost, aside from the critical like players in the game that I want to play with, or the like factions at play, like I'll develop those to a degree, but like most of the rest of that is left very blank. And I think that is so critically important to leave that space, because like when you're developing something, Diamond, like especially in the broader sense of like you're going out and thinking about how you want to tell a story, like Red Genesis, for example. How many blanks do you usually find yourself leaving on the table for your characters that you have around the table to kind of build upon themselves and like kind of take it out of your own hands and like just kind of set it in front of them and say, all right, here's where we're going, here's what we're doing, go wild?
So for me, it's very much I set with Red Genesis, because like leading up to Red Genesis, we had Gutter Rush for the characters to develop into their own, where they were out, doing stuff leading up to Red Genesis while I was preparing to move over here.
Right.
So Red Genesis, very much I was sitting there just like, okay, so we have someone that's come over and is and in the midst of some corporations wanting a drug made to basically pacify the combat zoners to a point that they could just kind of move them out of the way, so that way they could start picking up some of their land. It started getting out onto the streets as, you know, this designer drug that came from Biotechnica. And then it started spiraling out of control as other people were starting to cook their own versions of it, and then it started turning deadly. And that is the scenario I put in front of the party of, all right, this is what's happening now. How are you guys dealing with this? And I know who my antagonists are, and like, how do I want my party to find these antagonists? Is up to them. Like, they'll propose to me like how they're looking for them, and that's how I plan around that.
Okay, so you develop your really, like, not just your end game threat, like what we would call like a big bad evil guy, right? BBEG. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like you develop
also the connections.
The connections. Okay, interesting. Because I don't always go that far. I sometimes leave the connections as a blank because I want there to be room for player enemies and stuff to matter in that yep. scheme, right? So that's interesting because yeah. And so have you ever had that method backfire on you when you failed to leave those things as blanks?
I don't think I have. More often than not, because I tend to look at players' backgrounds to find that enemy that, you know, I want to use. But more often than not, my players really don't roll enemies.
That's also very fair. So when you find yourself in that position, though, so do you usually like have the player characters rolled up before you start really planning some of those elements, or
yes,
you do? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like for me, I find myself so often navigating it as here's the overarching story I want to tell, kind of similar to how like you would structure it if you're running a campaign like Hope Reborn, and like here's the big stuff that's going to happen along this thread, right? What the nuance of that looks like is going to be shaped by player hands in a lot of ways, whether that's them rolling something or deciding to do something. What I find myself most often doing is saying like, let me throw something in here that just is like, it might not have a purpose, or the purpose might be relatively minor, right? Whether that's a character or some kind of MacGuffin or some like thematic element within the scene. Like they find something on a computer, like Netrunner finds a file. That file contains some really throwaway line or something like that. So if they choose not to investigate or care about it, it's whatever. If they do though, and they start digging, that's a blank that they start to fill, and I can kind of come in and like feed them just little bits of nuggets of information where I'm like, yeah, this is, find a little something about this. Oh yeah, you discover a little something about that. And that's where their enemies start coming into play and stuff, where I can like say, okay, you care about this. Awesome. Let's talk more about that then. And like, let's develop your character around that being a central conflict. Or maybe not even a central conflict, but like for your character, that becomes a very personal thing that you want to tackle that more. You want to go after that more. Awesome. Like, let's develop that out and like play that into or against the central narrative somehow. And there's a lot of blank space there that like we kind of operate within when we start doing that. And that's what I think, like when I have talked with players like after games that I've run, their most memorable moments are usually the ones that they didn't plan for. And that's the wild thing, is like you're going to plan for things and they're going to be cool. It's not that your players are going to like look at that and say, yeah, that was nice and all, but like I preferred this time when I was in the middle of the spotlight and it was all on me. It's just that they feel the agency that you give them in those moments. In my experience, right? Where it's like, I felt my agency. I took my agency. Suddenly I've got this moment where I'm like standing on the roof of the police station. I'm yelling out to a crowd and suddenly there's a riot boiling underneath me. And in that moment, like this cooperation that we have between player and GM, and the way that scene builds, the tension pays off, and everything about that just feels so much more memorable because both player and GM had a hand working together in making that scene feel the way that it did. Because I'm curious, when you've gotten feedback from your players, because I've gotten it both ways, where I've got some where it's like, I felt like I wasn't really a factor in this on the negative side. And then I've gotten other times where it's like, I felt like I was the star in like an action film. And that was incredible. Like, have you gotten feedback both ways there in your experience too? Okay.
I have.
So, give me an example of both, because I'm actually kind of curious, like, when you developed an idea, like, where was like your biggest kind of payoff when you were running a game, and what was like the one where it fell flat and it wasn't really like a player attitude thing, it was just like I tried a new thing there and it didn't really work?
Usually when I get that like second half where it's just like I felt like I really didn't do much there, more often than not it has always been the dice, where it's just like, either the skill levels are just not high enough, and despite rolling a 5 or 6, it's not enough to make it happen. And I have been figuring out how to accommodate for players that, maybe they don't put everything into skill points, and try to make the adventure still accessible for them. However, at the same time, I have had it before where, there are missions where it does not make sense that these guys would even have a net architecture. Sure. And, me who plays a netrunner, like part of our kit is all about getting into net architectures.
Sure.
But still, I try to, when I look at like party composition for these adventures, I try to integrate things that different members of the party would be useful at.
Sure.
And if something happens to spark off because somebody happens to be rolling really well or running with the ball, we will. I'll run with it and see where we're going from there.
So, like, what would be
ahead.
like a really specific kind of example of like something where that sort of like we co-developed this between player and GM. And it could be like multiple players in GM, but like, where was that like big payoff moment? Like, what was one of your most memorable ones where that kind of happened, when that went well?
So this came from my Wednesday crew, actually, where I had planned for a couple of different routes that these guys were going to take to deal with someone that they had been after that slipped through their fingers. And they were deciding either they were going to scam the guy and get him tangled up in petrochem, or they were going to find a way to remove his influence from where he's at, and like what kind of things he has access to. And well, the party had decided, no. While that may be effective, while that may get the results we want, this person killed someone this person killed our tech, or they were responsible for the death of our tech. So instead of putting them to the mercy of the corporations, they were in the middle of making the scam happen, and then one of them's just like, GM, I'm gonna shoot him. I'm like, oh, okay. And it turned into a very hot, messy, violent firefight that really the party just chewed it up. Like, that was their even the non-combatants of the group got involved, and it was, not quote unquote non-combatants, but the more socially oriented members of the party got involved, which even led to one of the socialites deciding to dump all their luck into an aim shot on this politician's head, and may or may not have sent them into Morro Bay, or not Morro Bay, but the canal right next to Haywood.
Yeah. No, that's I mean, that's very cool. So, and then obviously then there's ramifications and consequences and all that follows that really deepens the way that the weight of that decision essentially, and the way it resolves around the players. So that's very cool.
It was the finale for them. It was like coming up on their end, and because they were such a high reputation party, where like they had garnered such a reputation that they don't do this stuff unless everything else has failed. That most people shrugged off any attempts to spin it as these guys have turned into psychos. Because I was like, okay, what does the media have to say? And the reputation was just too strong for this. It was like, because the media even posted, her own story on it. It's a success.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's one of those things where more they got a thank you from the political competition.
Because were they they were seen obviously then killing this person, this politician, in the midst of all this. It's interesting. Because I'm like, to me, that sounds like something that should have some very dire consequences, at least short term. Like
it will. We'll be coming back to that party. It will.
Interesting. Okay. So
don't worry.
You're looking at that as a continuity thing, as opposed to that's the end of their story. When you say that's the finale, that
is the finale because the group, my Wednesday group, wants to come back to that party after we do a campaign of Triangle Agency.
No, that's fair. Okay, got it. So
there will be consequences.
You're still looking at that long term. Okay, cool. Because I'm like, damn, that's like way more line that, because like generally if it is the campaign's finale, then I'm typically like, okay, this is an event that I had planned for. So while the approach in might look different, that end point is like firmly established in my mind. Like, this is where we are going to come to. One way or another, we're going to find our way there. And so to me, to hear like, oh yeah, this is the finale that we came to, and it was very dictated by player choice, is like, that's a lot. I'm like, it's hard for me, because that almost feels then more like like an open world sort of style game, where it's like, we're playing this more by the player agency side than me as GM deciding in a meaningful way kind of where we're going. For that group, would you say that that's maybe more the way you built it, or is that not accurate?
Like, that was supposed to be the end of the campaign, but they enjoyed playing that party so much that I'm now looking at like, what do we do now? It's kind of like where I'm at, and I may or may not already be plotting and scheming. I don't want to say too much, just because I know a couple of them do listen to this.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I'm curious, because I think of things like what I've done, like Neon Inferno, like both seasons of that, even like my personal games, my campaigns prior to that I've run, they almost always have like, this is where we are headed in my mind before we really dive too deep in. So for me, it's always like, we pick up agency along the way, and that shapes how that ends up looking. But there are some canonical elements of that finale that no matter how we've approached it or how we address it in the end, these elements are going to be in play. And whether the players, we can go pretty wide with it, obviously. Like, this is where I leave
Yeah.
blanks, where it's like, you might end up aligned with someone that I thought you were going to be in opposition to. Totally fine, right? Big bad evil guy may end up being your biggest advocate and like your biggest ally, maybe. And what we've decided is actually the conflict is something completely different, but it was shaped by those same events that I did plan for, right? The countdown is unchanged. It's just which elements are adversarial to the players have changed. But ultimately, it still builds against what my blueprint at the start looked like. That beginning, middle, end largely still covers what we were talking about. So that's fascinating to me. Because I think one of my biggest wins, where some of that was concerned, was watching it actually wasn't really Neon Inferno in my mind here, at least where I felt as the GM. My players for those seasons might disagree, but I know when it comes to like paying off something long term, the thing I always think back to is the way my very first campaign ended for Cyberpunk. And that was like, it was Jumpstart Kit, it was homebrewed as fuck because we didn't have official rules for any role other than Netrunner. And even those rules were still kind of in flux. Although I think of the things in the JSK that were being still developed, I think Netrunner was the one thing that they had mostly figured out at that point. They had kind of understood like, this is what we're gonna do. Because those rules I think are like the most unchanged part of the Jumpstart Kit. But we were homebrewing based on like stuff that and how it worked in 2020. Me and Evan were talking almost constantly about like, hey, you know, how would you interpret this? Because he had done more reading at the time than I had. And so together we were developing all these different ways that things were building out and happening and whatever. And the way that campaign built was there was a rogue element, essentially, like a rogue, not AI, but like a soul-killed individual on a data shard. This concluded before the end of, this concluded before we had 2077. We did not know about the way that Johnny would play into that. We did not know about the way that V would pick up a shard and this would happen. But it's very much like, this is a soul-killed engram of someone who died in the Fourth Corporate War. And the players had very early on found this stack of soul-killed personalities loaded onto data chips. And they brought it back to a fixer, and that fixer installed one of them, and that personality took over his. And from that point on, the players were no longer working for that fixer. They were working for this soul-killed person who they did not know was in the driver's seat. And so at the end, he convinces them, despite their wishes, right? Like, some of them were very against the sort of things he was doing. Some of them were very for it, but they all had loyalty. And so at the end of it all, they were brought forward as like, we're going to take down Biotechnica. We're going to sink them because I am only here. I am here alive only because I have not chosen to die, because my brother was taken from me in a bio attack that they facilitated in the war. And I will do anything to see them burn for it. And so that's where it leads to players dropping a nuke on the city again, this time on Biotechnica. But everything in that campaign paid off to be this like immensely like vibes filled, like just, it was very personal. It was very like, you felt it. The choices that players made before, during, and after this session were all very much like, some people couldn't stand to live with the aftermath when they realized what they had been convinced to do. And it was just like, it was incredible. That whole thing, like that scene, that aftermath, is the dragon I'm constantly chasing. Because it was so good. There was so much of that every part of our table helped to build and contribute to and construct. And it was like, without the things working together the exact way that they did, it would not have been nearly as satisfying. And so that's like what I always kind of go back to and think about when I think of like a really positive example of all of that. Now on the negative side, not that I want to focus on that, but it is, I feel like we learn when we kind of like go back and like interrogate that. What is like your biggest falls flat moment for you that had nothing to do really with so much with like player attitudes, let's say, right? Like not like personalities that were clashing or whatever, but rather were just like players and I tried to do something and it just did not play out in any way that was good and it felt extremely flat. Like, what's your flattest moment for something like that? Because I know that's something like we all try to forget those too, so it gets hard to remember them.
I think just yeah. Well, okay. So it was like, really early in my time of GMing, all right? Like long before,
well, that's kind of, I think
before Cyberpunk. Before Cyberpunk.
Well, and I think that's where we make most of these kinds of mistakes anyway, to give you grace there, right? Because when we're new, we're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing like, okay, what sticks? Because we're all trying to explore the new idea space that we've now got for building stuff and how to do it. So yeah, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Party wanted to do Siege so Pathfinder campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Party was decided to go on a world trotting adventure to basically rouse up as much of a help as they could to deal with a very, very overwhelming threat that was showing up in one of the party members' home country that's kind of consumed it. Basically, a religious cult to a wizard that proclaimed that they were God just because they could do things that most other wizards could not.
Okay.
Basically, wizard that could cast divine spells through means of some other stolen items. So the party wanted to commit to sieging the city once they had finally they went on a this was a 2-year campaign of them traveling across the world, meeting many of the other societies of a setting I used to play in, and finally it's down to that last end of it. And this was kind of like the one flop in this campaign that really, when I call it the flop, it's like that one session that was just kind of that hard flop, but really like we all kind of moved past it.
You're right. Yeah.
Where the party wanted to lay siege to the city, and we tried siege rules, and it was one of those things where it was I got so lost in like reading on how siege rules worked for Pathfinder First Edition, which for anyone that knows D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder First Edition, though they're chunky, they are very chunky.
They crunch.
I like them because there's a lot going on in there, but this was one of those things where I got so lost in the weeds on that one. It felt like we have combat slogs. This was one of those that like I really. It's not one of those things where it's like, let's forget this ever happened. It's more, I want to revisit this, but I need to figure out how I'm going to revisit like laying siege in a way that like works cinematically well.
Right. So let me ask, so was what fell flat about that mostly just that it took so long and it was just like so clumsy to resolve, or
it took so long, it was clumsy to resolve, and the players felt a little out of their elements in their classes, where it was just like, this isn't so much us playing our class, this is us managing, you know, a massive amount of people.
Right.
Meanwhile, here I am, the GM, managing 2 massive amounts of people.
Right, but I do think, yeah, that there's a line in the sand drawn a little when players are playing and the GM is GMing. The GM is expected to manage. The players very typically are not. There's a couple of instances where that's not necessarily true, but like by and large, players are not really there to manage stuff. And it's actually funny because I've actually got a fall flat story that kind of follows that same logic. So there are kind of 2 that I would present. One, ironically, was also a siege, but within Cyberpunk. It was actually one that is up on my channel. People can watch it, learn from my terrible idea that I sounded good at the time. There was an 8-hour session. It was nearly 8 hours, but effectively an 8-hour session, where I had this overwhelming sense of, oh my god, I just want to resolve this beat. I want to resolve this beat so badly. And I wanted to look narrative, and I wanted to. This is back when I was still learning, not so much Cyberpunk, but I was learning how do you make an actual play, and how do actual plays work, right? Because you want it to have, like, every episode needs to kind of have that beginning, middle, end if you're structuring it as like a thing, right? And so whenever I get near this beat and I wanted to like do the beat, one of my players would be like, I gotta go, I can't stay anymore. And I'm like, I just want to resolve this in a way that makes narrative satisfaction happen. And so we spent 3 or 4 sessions circling that drain. And I felt it in my mind, and I had this sense of, I want to resolve this so badly that I pushed for 8 hours with this crew, and it got to be so like dragged down by it. And I hated the way it resolved, felt so bad. And I like, across the table, everyone's like, it was a really neat idea. Like, everyone was invested in the idea and the outcome and how it all played. The problem was that resolving it mechanically at the table was so crunchy, because again, at the time, we didn't have mass combat rules of any kind. We haven't developed like how to truncate some of these things that we need to truncate. And so it just ended up slogging, and it was so bad. And I felt not great about it afterward. And I was like, shit, like 8 hours of sitting there and resolving it, and it just did not feel good. Did not feel good. It did not feel interesting. Did not feel that fun. It just kind of felt like a drag, right? So that is one where like the siege thing, I was trying a novel concept that just didn't work because I was looking at the concept wrong and how to resolve it wrong, because it can clearly be done way better. Like if I knew today what or if I knew then what I now know today, rather, I would resolve that with a mass combat. I would resolve that with truncated rules for combat, especially where the players weren't involved. There would be a whole thing where we'd be doing that a whole different way, and I could resolve that within 4 hours as its own beat, and like I'd be satisfied with it. That's one of those big things I learned for season 2, and by season 2 I felt much better about the way I was running things. So that's example 1. Example 2, where the management thing came in, and this is where I hear echoes of this every time I hear the refrain in the Discord. Like, if you turn Cyberpunk into a business simulator of any kind, you're no longer playing Cyberpunk. You're playing a different game that needs different rules, that doesn't work the way that this one does, right? So I was learning core Cyberpunk for the first time. This was the very first campaign I was trying to run after the full rules came out. And I'd done a very cursory read over them over the course of like 3 weeks, leading up to the release of 2077, because my friends were all going to come here. We're going to have a LAN party. Despite it being COVID, we had all bubbled up. We kind of knew who was all going to be there. We all trusted that we tested ahead of time. We knew we weren't sick with COVID. We were gathering in the name of doing something fun in the middle of all of that. So we got together for this 3-day LAN party to play Cyberpunk 2077. And in the middle of that, I was going to run our first session of a new campaign with the full rules, and we're going to have a good time. And my wife, who was one of the players, came up with this idea that she was going to be a fixer who basically built it up where she would make these XPDs. And like that was a big part of like her identity, and like that she was going to be doing it out of this club. And I misinterpreted the concept as she wanted to have ownership in the club. And so it turned very much into a business spreadsheety sim out of the gate that just did not work at all. And it was like, I didn't want to manage this. I just wanted to do something in this concept. And I completely missed the mark. Completely misunderstood. So when you texture that against also not knowing the rules super well yet, I was still learning a lot of what the world was supposed to feel like and look like and all that. These are where a ton of my How to GM videos came from, was learning from this campaign about this is what you don't do. This is what you don't do. You don't do this. You don't run it this way. You don't do any of that bullshit. You go a very different way with it. And I learned so much from that. That was, fuck, why did you think to do it that way? That was the refrain I kept telling myself is, why did you do it that way, you idiot? Like, you could have done it these 3 or 4 other ways and it would turn out way better. And so I learned from that. And this is where I say I bring these negative examples up, not so that we can dwell on oh God, that sucked. It's more of I learned from that. I got better from that. And these are the ways in which I continue learning. Like, self-reflection that way is something that, like, it takes some practice to be good about it and not give yourself this, like, very negative self-dialogue that descends into, like, well, I just suck. I'm bad at jamming. You don't suck. Everyone's bad when they're new to something. Because, again, like, we're testing new things. We're trying things out. And that's where it's like, we leave blanks there up front and don't come in with this very preconceived notion of like, this is how we're going to do it. You leave room for players to express the way they want to do things. And then it's not we're doing it this way. It's how are we doing this to accomplish a goal that I, as the GM, maybe have in mind, or a player brings to the table and say, well, this is the arc I want my character to go down. So we're going to explore elements of the world that are related to that drive or desire, what have you. You know, that's kind of where I dig into it through that lens now. Because let me ask this, like your Siege example, were there things that in retrospect you could have left blank that your players could have filled in for you that would have made that a more tolerable experience at least, or that would have resolved things in a better way maybe? Or would that still not have saved it?
This would have been one of those situations where having the mass combat rules would have been nice. That's what that Siege really needed, because I was using, as much as I adore Pathfinder 1E's attention to detail, Oh, there's a lot of detail. I'm like, okay, maybe this is not the play.
Right. Well, and that's when I glanced over like Starfinder 1E. It was the same way where I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, the crunch. Oh god, I feel it in my soul. That's not good.
Like, would I run another Pathfinder 1E campaign? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would there be things that I take from Cyberpunk and other games that I've learned? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And apply them that way. To simplify stuff, and like that's something that would absolutely have to be done. One of the other campaigns that we did that the party wanted to try, and this was something I was willing to jump into, but I was also kind of hitting that burnout of fantasy D20 RPGs where they wanted to run, where we were going to do a D&D 5e campaign, and they wanted to do settling, where they are setting up their own village, and the power fantasy that D&D 5e brings for those that are playing it, I don't think that's really would have been well set for a campaign where you are establishing a village.
Sure.
I got a feeling there's got to be RPGs out there where you are, doing something like that. I imagine there's got to be something out there for that.
Well, and I think that like a game kind of in the vein of that kind of comes to mind. There's a mode with an alien that you could play, which that's the whole kind of point of building better worlds, is like you are helping to build a colony. And so there's elements of that where you want to build a settlement and like protect it. As I've understood it, again, I've not really read deep into the rules for doing all of that, but my understanding is that that's where a lot of the campaign elements of Alien start to come in, is like, what are you doing as a Weyland-Yutani employee that is trying to build an outpost or a settlement of some kind of colony out on the edge of things? Like, what threats do you encounter? What challenges do you endure? That is where you get the campaign out of that. Whereas like if you're playing the highly cinematic mode, that's where you've got abandoned ships and face huggers and xenomorphs and all of that, where it's like very yes, this scene is ripped straight out of every Alien movie I have ever seen. Good Lord, this is horrifying. Fallout
2D20 has that as well. They have setups for like Wanderer campaigns and settlement campaigns as well. Trying to think. And I guess to a degree, Cyberpunk has that with HQ.
Yeah, sort of, kinda. It's a little different because it's not quite. It doesn't become the focus of your campaign by and large. Not usually. No. Like we get tastes of it. Things like Hope Reborn really lean heavy into that. But it's like it's always a secondary objective, it almost feels like, as opposed to a primary one. Like usually the building is the means to the end, but it's not the end itself. At least not where the players are concerned. For them, it becomes a job, or it becomes maybe more personal than just a job, but it's still like the building and the maintenance of a community is almost secondary. Like, I don't doubt that you could build a campaign like that, but yeah, again, Cyberpunk maybe isn't the engine to do that.
Yeah,
and that's where it gets kind of tricky, because I'm like, go ahead.
And there's also certain types of players for certain types of games. For me, I can absolutely do resource games where not resources in the way that TCGs play, but like very much more like if you've ever seen me play Valheim, I am very much Camp Mom. I am very good about keeping home base safe and most of my venturing is going to be in, in the name of improving home.
Right.
And, that's, I gotta feel like that's something that they were looking for, and I'm not sure that we had the systems in play for such a adventure.
Right. And I think it's important to create locales your players care about to that degree.
Yeah.
Where they want to help it and make it feel good, but they should not be the ones, I think, administrating that, right? Like it's where does the administration fall that takes that apart, where like Cyberpunk doesn't lean heavy into the administration of a community. It leans into you being the muscle that keeps it safe, right?
Yep.
Or the hands that help build it, but ultimately, you don't run it. And if you do, most likely you're gonna have some big problems. Not so much like from a systemic, I mean like in the world, things are gonna come after you. Nothing that you create is something that will last if your enemies have anything to say about it. And so that's the tricky thing. But yeah, I think so. On the topic of like leaving blanks, this is where like I'll probably do like a how to GM on this as well at some point in the future here, because like I feel pretty strongly about like doing this is like to your benefit. I find a lot of people, and there's some truth to this, I think, with pre-written gigs sometimes, where like I know it's been a criticism of mine where I look at a certain adventure and I'm like, there wasn't enough detail here. Like there wasn't enough detail given to like how I'm supposed to set things up or what people are doing or whatever, right? Like there's a degree to which like the scene is built that way, so you, the GM, and your table can answer for yourselves, like given the context of your group and what you like to do and how you run things, what are the reasons? Like what is the logic behind person A having, thing B, as their goal? Or, what is the reason your players are here in the first place? Like you can answer that. But there are times where I feel like the specificity that needs to be there for certain elements to resolve correctly just isn't. And that's where I'm like, ooh, okay. I if I'm being given something pre-written to really work with, I like having some of this explained, where I'm like, where they have a core reason why they're doing something, or like, especially in combat scenarios where it's like, we have to resolve a conflict. I like knowing kind of where people stand at the start of things, so I can automatically know like, okay, you guys are about 20 meters apart, and so the enemy party, their first actions are probably going to be to move in closer, or to, like this one's going to stay back because they've got a rifle, the other two have pistols, so they're going to get close. And so it pretty organically from there then starts like working itself out. But not having that initial like, where do we start this, is like very frustrating at times. So that's like, I know in my own planning, the thing that I give credence to when I'm like trying to think of, okay, this is an important scenario, kind of conflict within this scenario, right? Like where do things exist? And then the blanks I leave usually are around that. Like what is the context under which that's happening? Could be for a couple different reasons. The point is this will happen for one reason or another. We just need to like establish what those are. And that's something I'm fine leaving open-ended. And just like the players will find their way to it. Or maybe that's where I say, oh yeah, that's right. The fixer has this enemy that is in their backstory. They're probably the one meddling in the affairs here. But I leave that so open that like if I were to hand the core idea of the session to someone else and tell them like, you can run this, it'll work, I can do that. But that's just how I like prepping things, because that's how I think about the game, is in the context of like designing scenarios and building them up to be run at tables outside my own. And it's weird, like it's so often, especially Rob has started saying a lot more recently, like, you are building a game for your players at your table. And I'm like, for me, I like thinking broader than that, just because the story gets more interesting then, because I'm thinking about, okay, where is the blank space that someone could make this their own, so it's not so prescriptive, and it can become something that players can engage with in other ways. So yeah, that's kind of my take. Any kind of final thoughts from you? I know we're kind of coming down to the end of the hour on this, but any final thoughts from you on the topic or any of that we haven't explored?
I suppose is my closing thoughts on leaving room for the blanks. Leaving yourself that kind of cushion gives you the ability to be flexible with your players' decisions, as we've mentioned. And I have had to learn that over the past couple years. And I feel I've gotten better and better with that, especially with us being professional GMs.
Yeah.
You learn to work with that, especially like with my Saturday game being a revolving door of players. So you have to learn to be flexible.
Right.
That being said, I don't really have anything. I don't even have questions from anyone today.
Yeah, no, I don't think I do either. Yeah, I think that, and I guess my final thoughts on the topic overall is flexibility is never a bad thing. It is your friend as a GM, even in worlds or scenarios that are like very well defined. Like a great Cyberpunk example of this is Red Chrome Cargo. You look at Red Chrome Cargo on the outside, that scenario looks so like, you run it once, you'll do the same thing over and over and over and over. That scenario can be so much more interesting than it first appears, though. Because what's in the other boxes? Who is taking over the train even? It doesn't have to be the Red Chrome Legion. I always tout that, like, I think it's one of my favorite scenarios because it's the one of the few Cyberpunk scenarios that features them, or like, pre-written adventures in Cyberpunk, features them as the bad guys. So it's the one where you can punch a fascist in the face, which is always fun. But they don't have to be the force that's taking this train over. The core concept of that is it is a train heist. Someone has taken this train full of goods. The goods need to be returned to someone. How you build around that is very well, it could change. It's very malleable. And so like, learning where the blanks exist there is so critically important to, like, you want to play it different, fuck with the blanks. Or build in blanks where the adventure didn't really leave you any. Like the faction. Who's the faction? Could be anybody. Who are the hiring, who's the hiring person or group, right? It says it's Hornet, doesn't have to be Hornet. Could be Militech. It could be like they want you to get the train back for them rather than it just being this Militech train was taken. It's got a bunch of goods on it. Like, could be Militech wanting you to get their train back. Could be an Arasaka operative saying like, we want what's on that train. And these assholes, maybe you're taking it from Militech. You could do all kinds of fun stuff with that. And it's just about first recognizing that not knowing is a good thing. Not knowing is fine, and you and your players can build that out how you want to, whether that's in your prep or even at the table itself. Like, let's leave a couple of unknowns, and then whoever proposes the first idea, just be like, yep, that's mine now. Which is why, like, I love it and cackle with glee, evil glee, when a player's like, don't give the GM ideas. I'm like, it's too late, you already did. Like, and I'm stealing that and now using it. Or they start saying, man, it would be really shitty, or it would really fucking suck if, and they present a great idea. I'm like, that's a wonderful idea.
At least it wasn't X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z happens.
Right, exactly. It's like, or you put it in your back pocket and you're like, I'm going to keep that one around for 5 or 6 sessions, and at the end of that, I'm going to pull that one back out.
Oh, I love doing that, where it's just like, oh, by the way, here. What? Why? And like,
Right.
Well, you remember this little domino effect that happened here a little while back? How you mentioned at least it wasn't this. Well, apparently this
It
was
was.
wanting what you got your hands on.
Yeah.
So, here, enjoy.
Oh goodness, it's consequences of your own actions and the downstream of you suggesting such a thing to me. Thank you, by the way. Because 6 sessions from now, I didn't know what we were doing then. Now I do. Yeah, it's so good. That's what I mean by leaving blanks and exploiting the hell out of them. Because it's not really, that's not being mean to your players. If anything, it's you've given them their spotlight that they asked for, because you're like, ah, cool. Yeah, it's like this. It would be a real shame if something like that happened. Let's see how you do when it happens. So like, because now they basically asked for it, and it's like, unless it is like deeply crossing some kind of fundamental boundary that they've set at session 0 or something, or that you know about them that's come up in the midst of the campaign, that's never going to come off as mean. If anything, it's going to be a shit. All right. Well, now that the worst has happened, what are we going to fucking do? And it's hilarious every time. Players are going to do well under that pressure because now they've subconsciously considered it, and now they can deal with it in very real space and time. But yeah, I think that's why this is so important. And like I said, I might do like my own independent video on this later in my how to GM side of things, because I want to maybe give this one a little more space and maybe explain more explicitly, like here's how I do it. But I think this gives a pretty good high level overview and example of like what I'm talking about when we talk about that. With that said, as Dime and I both kind of expressed earlier, I don't think we have any questions. So chat, this is your wonderful opportunity where if any of you have questions for us, we would be happy to field them. I know earlier we had the question of, well, V3 and Red, where is the addition? But like, I don't know. That again, I don't know that I have strong opinions about it, because Cyberpunk really isn't the kind of game to define itself by numeric additions the way that other games do. I think V3 almost was the death of that in a weird way, because they tried to assign it a number and then it just kind of fell through, and then Red came out after. So like Red by that logic would be 4th edition, but I don't really know that we would call it that, because it's more of its own thing that is homage toward the things that came before it, that it honors in various ways, even the spin-off stuff that's non-canon at this point. But yeah, that's kind of my full take on that side of things. So yeah, chat, if you have questions, speak now or hold them until next week when we will be back for more discussion along the topics as needed.
Any questions?
Going once.
Going twice.
And sold. It's time to maybe take an early week, short of our normal time frame. It's my birthday. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't have any celebration planned for tonight. But
I didn't know if you two were gonna be going to dinner or something.
No, not as far as I'm aware. I like, my wife's been asking me all week, like, hey, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I haven't had the time to think. I've been traveling the last 2 weeks, and then I'm back, and we're just kind of dropping back into things. So thank you so much, Pepperjack. I appreciate it. And thank you for the sub earlier. I appreciate the birthday wishes. But yeah, I think that's going to be our show for the week. So once again, as always, my name is Emmerron.
And I'm Diamond Dust.
And I hope all of you have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon wherever you're in the world. Stay healthy, stay safe. Till next time, guys. Peace.
Bye.